Hi there, welcome to this video where we're going to explore one of the enduring legends of the 20th century, the curse of the Pharaohs. To do that, we can undertake a YouTube expedition and visit the tomb of this Victorian gentleman, George Herbert, aka Lord Carnarvon, the leader of the expedition who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb and then died just days later horribly. Lord Carnarvon died in 1923 in Cairo in Egypt, so you might think that our expedition to his tomb would start in the Egyptian deserts. Well, not exactly. No, we're on a McDonald's car park in the Tot Hill services off the A34 Trunk Road, Berkshire in England. The reason we are here is because although Lord Carnarvon died in Egypt, he's actually buried in a remote location in Hampshire in England. So this McDonald's will serve as our start point for our expedition. I think you need some maps to explain. So the big map of the UK, here we are presently on the A34 Trunk Road between the town of Newbury and the town of Basingstoke. Zooming into detail on the OS 1 in 25,000 map, here we are again then at Ronald's Golden Arches of the Tot Hill services on the A34. Now we need to get here to a feature called Beacon Hill, about 2 miles to the south. The trouble is, we can't use the A34 Trunk Road because there are no further turn-offs between our location and Basingstoke. So we're going to need to use minor roads to get to our objective. If your screen resolution is good enough, look at the tip of the bottom arrow and you'll see it's pointing at a feature of the map simply marked as Grave. This is our final objective. Yeah, I know, maps don't really work on YouTube, particularly if you're on a small resolution, so a picture paints 1,000 words. Let me show you our objective. Beacon Hill in Hampshire. It's not exactly Mount Everest, I know, but it's still quite a high feature for Hampshire in England, and it dominates the surrounding countryside. So enough maps and preamble, let's get this expedition on the road. From McDonald's in Tot Hill, we're going to drive about 2 miles south on B roads, which are UK rural roads, before we have to ditch the car and make the rest of our way on foot. It's about a 10-minute drive from here to our drop-off point. So, because I know roads are boring on YouTube, let me do my first of 3 history explainers to give you the background to our expedition. Okay, have you ever wondered why we, certainly in the UK, have such a connection with the legends of ancient Egypt?
This is Cleopatra, the fabulous Queen of the Nile.
Who is this Cleopatra?
That bird that rules Egypt. I think she could cause us a lot of trouble.
Don't they all?
Hey.
And this includes you, by the way. Why else are you watching this video? But we can largely blame the Victorians for this cultural interest because they started a phenomenon that later became known as Egyptomania. Britain had been involved in the Nile Delta from the early 1700s as a trade route to India and the Far East, but it was really the start of the 19th century where we became militarily involved. First in 1801, helping the Ottoman Empire to eradicate Napoleon's forces who were occupying the Nile Delta, and then in 1882 Britain seized military control of Egypt. Even at the peak of our military involvement, Egypt was never a formal part of the British Empire, rather it was a protectorate, and our military involvement lasted right up until the Suez Crisis of 1956. During the mid to late 1800s, under British military control and protection, Egypt became a magnet for explorers and adventurers. It was during this period that many notable antiquities were sent back to the UK to be displayed to the public in museums such as the British Museum in London, which drew large amounts of visitors. Also, the printed media of the time ran numerous articles and accounts of stories from ancient Egypt. And today, 150 years later, most of those antiquities that so fascinated the Victorians are still on display in the British Museum in London. It's a good day out and I recommend you do pay a visit. It's free to enter as well. More evidence of Victorian Egyptomania can be found in architecture around London, such as the famous Egypt Avenue in Highgate Cemetery, built in 1838. And of course, on London's Victoria Embankment is the famous Cleopatra's Needle Monument, and I'll talk more about that later in the video. As well as the Needle Monument itself, guarded by its 2 giant fake bronze sphinxes. All along Victorian Embankment are park benches, and if you look closely, you'll see they are the original Victorian ironwork decorated in ancient Egypt style. British Victorian and Western Egyptomania lasted to the end of the 19th century, by which time the media had created many myths and legends, which I'll tell later on in the video. Back then to the expedition. To bring you up to speed, we've now left the UK B Road network and are driving on dirt tracks to the start of the Beacon Hill footpath. Although it is quite muddy, it is passable for an average road car, and it is publicly accessible by permission of the landowner. Once you get to the 5-bar gate, that's as far as you can go. It's time to park the car up, get our backpack on and start climbing. So from the car park, we cross this 5-bar gate behind me, and there is quite a well-worn footpath, at least at the start, through the trees and up to the start of the hill. Then we're going to climb to the top of Beacon Hill. It's going to take about 15-20 minutes, probably 20 minutes, because I'm not feeling very energetic today. And once we're at the top, I'll show a bit of a panorama and we'll have another discussion. So let's start our climb, shall we? There is a well-worn and marked footpath to the summit of Beacon Hill, and it will take the average person probably about 20 minutes to get to the summit. The path isn't particularly steep, but it is a bit slippery and muddy in winter. Just pick your feet up and watch where you're going. We are quite remote, but not that remote, so do expect to see other people here, as the footpath is quite popular with dog walkers. Okay, so we're about halfway up Beacon Hill now, and it's taken me about 10 minutes through the trees to get here. It's not quite steep. It's certainly not in the league of my expedition up Mount Fuji. You can check that video out if you're interested in that. But it can be a bit treacherous, particularly in wet weather. It's very slippy, muddy chalkland. Behind me you can see the Hampshire valleys and just about the traffic on the A34 that we left behind us 10 minutes ago. So we're going to keep going now to the summit of Beacon Hill, to the trigonometry station, which marks the summit of the hill. And we'll check in there. When I find it, when I go past it, I'm going to show you the earthworks and the ramparts of the old Iron Age hill fort, and I'll explain a bit about the original history of Beacon Hill. Let's keep going then, shall we? From about halfway up, you leave the tree line, and then the hillside becomes open, rolling countryside with a few sparse bushes and really great views across the Hampshire Downs. As I complete my trek up the hill, let's take a look at the reason we're making this journey today. The legend of the curse of the Pharaohs. I imagine you've probably already heard of the curse of the Pharaohs, that anybody who broke into a pyramid or a tomb died quickly soon after, usually in a horrible way, or that when they returned home they were haunted for the rest of their lives by demons or monsters. It's a great legend, but it's largely nonsense, and it is in fact an invention of the late 19th century and early 20th century Western media. It is true that during the Ottoman era, ancient Egyptian tombs were associated with superstition and bad luck, and it's also true that grave robbers of that era sometimes came to a premature sticky end, but this can be explained by accidents such as falls or collapses, and sometimes disease picked up in the tombs, such as anthrax or rabies. Another widespread myth that is simply not true is that ancient Egyptian tombs had curses or dire warnings in hieroglyphics at the entrances and inside the tombs. When the hieroglyphic language was deciphered in the early 1800s, it was found that no such warnings existed, and where a mention was made, it was akin to a "do not trespass" sign. So then, if it's all a myth, where did the curse of the Pharaohs, the Mummies curse, start? Well, largely with this fella, and I'm sure you've heard of him, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It was in fact popular Victorian author and playwright Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who started the Curse of the Pharaohs and the Haunted Mummy genre. As well as the classic Sherlock Holmes, in 1892 Doyle wrote Lot Number 249. A story of cursed artefacts looted from Egypt and brought back to London by explorers, which included the mummy of a pharaoh stolen from a tomb, that then becomes a reanimated monster. Doyle took his inspiration for the novel from artefacts at the British Museum, including unwrapped mummies, which admittedly can look quite scary, but also from the story of the transport accident of Cleopatra's Needle a decade earlier. As I've already mentioned, Cleopatra's Needle was installed in London in the year 1878. However, a year before that, during its transport from Egypt to England by sea, there was a serious incident. The barge containing the stone needle broke free from its towing ship and floundered in a storm in the Bay of Biscay. During efforts to secure the barge in the storm, the lives of 6 seamen were lost. Whilst not quite called a curse, the Victorian media of the day speculated on a supernatural cause for the disaster, citing angry Egyptian pharaoh spirits. The names of the 6 seamen lost in the accident are commemorated to this day on a bronze plaque on the side of the present-day Cleopatra's Needle. That was not the end of superstition and allegations of the supernatural surrounding Cleopatra's Needle, because in a major building error, the sphinxes, who were supposed to face out to guard the needle, were installed the wrong way round, facing inwards, and by the time the architect noticed the building error, it became too expensive to move them again. It was suggested that this would be a major insult to the memory of the pharaohs, and there would be repercussions. And if you believe the superstition, then that repercussion came 40 years later, during World War I. The 4th of September 1917, a German Zeppelin bomb intended for the Houses of Parliament in Westminster fell massively short and landed at the base of the needle next to one of the sphinxes, severely damaging the stonework and the pedestal and the sphinx. Surprisingly, the ancient needle itself was completely unscathed. It was suggested by the superstitious at the time that supernatural forces caused the German bomb to divert and land at the base of the Sphinx in order to destroy the abomination of the fake sphinxes facing the wrong way. And if you visit Cleopatra's Needle, to this day, over 100 years later, the bomb damage from that German bomb is still visible. So as we can see, by 1920, ancient Egypt and Egyptology was becoming intertwined with legends of the supernatural in the Western media. But it was truly Lord Carnarvon's expedition in 1922-23 that set the legend of the Pharaoh's curse alight in the media, and I'll cover that story towards the end of the video. Something else happened from the 1920s onwards, the rise of the motion picture, the movie. Studios now, looking for stories to put into celluloid, scoured existing literature. For example, Bram Stoker's Dracula became the monster movie Nosferatu in 1922, a major financial success, and launched the horror monster genre. A studio looking to replicate the financial success of Nosferatu scoured literature for another monster feature that could be co-opted and decided upon Lot 249 by Arthur Conan Doyle, which then became The Mummy, 1932.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket in the name of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. Good heavens, what a terrible curse.
Well, let's see what's inside.
Wait!
The plot of the movie not only borrowed from Lot 249, but all other superstition surrounding ancient Egypt, including Carnarvon's expedition. Again, this movie became a major financial success, which spawned a whole sub-genre of monster movie, the mummy movies, such as 1944's The Curse of the Mummy. For 70 years, The Curse of the Mummy and The Curse of the Pharaohs has been a mainstay of movie and television entertainment, even for kids.
This is the mummy of Ankh, once the most feared ruler of ancient Egypt.
Wow! He could still scare me, Professor.
The supernatural ancient Egypt genre movie continues to this day, including the big-budget reimagining of the 1932 movie The Mummy, made in 1999, starring Brendan Fraser.
Home of Imhotep, Pharaoh's high priest, keeper of the dead. Savanaksunamun, Pharaoh's mistress. No other man was allowed to touch her.
Okay, I'm not going to apologise for the lingering shot of the absolutely stunning Patricia Velazquez there, because there is a historical purpose behind this clip. There are 3 real-world historical characters featured in the 1999 movie, so let's look at those. Tutankhamun, played by the absolutely gorgeous Patricia Velazquez. She was actually Tutankhamun's queen and not his mistress. And also, the styling of the actress in the movie is historically accurate, taken from artwork at the time. And Arnold Vosloo's character, the priestly counsellor, Imhotep, is based on a key ancient Egyptian historical figure, and both look like Mr. Potato Head. The third real-world character, and really important for today's expedition and video, is Rachel Weisz's character, the posh English, sexy librarian and ancient Egypt expert Evelyn Evie Carnahan, who is based on this lady, Evelyn Beesham, aka Lady Evelyn Carnarvon. Presumably the studio changed the name slightly for legal reasons, although Lady Carnarvon died in 1980. Like Rachel Weisz's character, Evelyn was indeed a respected and very distinguished Egyptologist, but I don't think she was a librarian, sexy or otherwise. She was the first woman to enter Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, days after it was discovered. So, what's Evelyn's relevance or the 1999 Mummy movie references? Well, you might be ahead of me now, the clue's in her name. She is the daughter of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, Lord Carnarvon, whose tomb we're about to visit. And to finalise all this, here she is, with her father, Lord Carnarvon, on the left, and on the right is lead explorer, Howard Carter, in front of the entrance to Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. And back to Beacon Hill, where we're going to go on a quick side quest now to look at another piece of ancient British history, but from a different era. About 3/4 of the way up Beacon Hill, you'll come across this very prominent ridgeline with a ditch either side that circumnavigates the hill. Okay, it might not be that prominent on the GoPro. I'll try and show you with a different camera. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put a graphic up to show you exactly what's here. Now, at the beginning of the video, I teased you a bit with the pyramids of Giza. And as we know, they were built 4,000, 4,500 years before Christ. Well, what's here on Beacon Hill isn't that quite old, but for the UK, it is reasonably old. And in historical terms, this is 1,000 years before Christ. This then is the remains of the fortifications of the community that was here during the Iron Age. Beacon Hill Iron Age Fort. I'll tell you what, I'll show you on a graphic, it'll make much more sense to you. The White Arrow is where I'm presently stood on Beacon Hill, and from the air photograph you can clearly see marked the outline of the Iron Age hill fort ditch and the earthwork ramparts. Even though we're here to explore history from another era, it is still amazing to witness such clear evidence of life here 1,200, 500 years BC. Beacon Hill Iron Age hill fort is one of several hill forts in this area of England, and it would have accommodated around 2,000 to 3,000 people of the early Celtic Belgae tribe in its community behind its fortifications. And thanks to this graphic from Historic England, we can visualise how life would have looked on this spot 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Leaving our Iron Age hill fort side quest behind us, it's a further 5 minutes walk to the summit of Beacon Hill and to our navigation waypoint, the trig post. Okay, sorry if it's a bit windy on the mic, it is quite blowy up here, and we're now at the top of Beacon Hill. This is the waypoint we've been looking for, the 1936 era trigonometry station. These concrete trig stations were a feature of many British hills. They were placed there in the 30s for surveying the whole of the United Kingdom in the ages before satellite survey. So to get to Lord Carnarvon's tomb, from here we're going to go due west, about 200 metres, slightly downhill. Now if it's daylight and it's good weather, you should be able to see the tomb as you go over the crest. If the clouds in, which it is sometimes up here, then just kind of pace it out. There is a footpath or a sheep track but it isn't very well marked. If you miss it, you start going downhill very steeply, you've gone wrong. Come back to the trig point and try again. Let's go and take a look at Lord Carnarvon's tomb then. Well, I couldn't really ask for a better special effect, could I? Behind me, over my right shoulder, about 100 metres down the hill, is the fencing around Lord Carnarvon's tomb. I've had sunshine all day, and the moment I approach Lord Carnarvon's tomb, there's a big black cloud descended, see it there, descended over Beacon Hill. Yeah, you couldn't ask for a more spooky episode, could you? But we'll continue down the hill, and let's take a look at the tomb. Hopefully the sun will come out so we can have a good view of it. I'll tell you what, I'll let the drone lead you from the trig point down to Lord Carnarvon's tomb compound, because the footpath isn't very well defined, and it's rare the weather's this good up here. So here we are then, the end of the journey, the end of the expedition. It's taken us about 25 minutes walking from when we left the car to get to this point, but behind me is Lord Carnarvon's tomb. Now, before we look at it in any detail, I think we should tell the legend. Now, in the title and on the thumbnail, I called it the Cursed Tomb of Lord Carnarvon. That wasn't just clickbait, there is a legend to this tomb and why it is here in the middle of nowhere. But to tell that story, I think we need to go back to the studio and look at the whole Lord Carnarvon Carter expedition and the locating of Tutankhamun's tomb, and then the alleged curse of Tutankhamun, the untimely death of Lord Carnarvon and much of his expedition, and the legend that runs on to this day. So let's take a quick trip back to the studio. George Herbert inherited the title 5th Earl of Carnarvon in 1890, becoming Lord Carnarvon at the age of 24. The title also brought ownership of the vast Highclere estate in Hampshire, of which Beacon Hill is part of, and also ownership of Highclere Castle, the stately home which is the ancestral seat of the Carnarvons. You might not have heard of Highclere Castle or the Highclere estate, but I'm sure you'll recognise it, because Highclere Castle is the setting for the fictional drama series Downton Abbey. It's fair to say that Lord Carnarvon in the late 1800s was caught up in the Victorian era Egyptomania, which we've already discussed, and he was fascinated with ancient Egypt, an interest that he passed on to his daughter Evelyn. As an exceedingly wealthy gentleman, Lord Carnarvon was able to buy antiquities to be exported back to the UK and displayed in museums, and he also sponsored archaeological digs and expeditions in unexplored parts of Egypt. From the early 1900s onwards, Lord Carnarvon began to suffer from ill health, so to avoid the harsh British winters, he took to spending winter in Cairo in Egypt. It was here that he met professional archaeologist Howard Carter. Carter utilised Carnarvon's interest in antiquities to get him to finance a major archaeological exploration in what is now known as Valley of the Kings, near Luxor. Carter's team was huge, with over 50 archaeologists and over 100 locally employed labourers. For 3 years, Howard Carter and his team scoured the valley with little success until one day, almost by accident, a labourer clearing rubble from a demolished building came across a buried stairway. It became apparent almost immediately once they excavated that the stairway was the entrance to a hitherto undiscovered royal tomb. Pictured here with Carnarvon, Evelyn and Carter at the tomb entrance. In fairness, I'm not really doing the whole story justice here, and I recommend that you watch the docudrama Tutankhamun from 2016 for the full, fascinating story. In that drama, Lord Carnarvon is played by Sam Neill, Evelyn by Amy Wren, and Max Imes playing Howard Carter. The tomb Howard Carter discovered, although Carnarvon is always given joint credit, turned out to be one of mankind's most famous archaeological discoveries. The completely untouched tomb of the Pharaoh Tutankhamun that had been sealed for over 3,000 years. Needless to say, the monumentous discovery made headlines across the entire world, but very quickly the newspaper headlines were about Carnarvon himself, because when visiting the tomb with Carter one day, he was bitten by a small desert sandfly. In the desert heat, quickly the sandfly bite became infected, and Carnarvon, already in significant ill health, developed septicemia, and within 48 hours he was dead. At first, the world's media simply reported the facts of Carnarvon's demise, but very quickly, as the media does, banking on literary superstition surrounding ancient Egypt, began to speculate that he had died because of a pharaoh's curse, something Howard Carter poured cold water on and said no curse existed at the tomb. Soon, Carnarvon's death, allegedly due to the curse of Tutankhamun, became a bigger news story around the world than the actual scientific archaeology involved in the find. Mid-20th century onwards, a piece of fake news was repeated by the media as if it were fact. It was alleged that all of Carnarvon's expedition died young in mysterious circumstances attributed to the curse of Tutankhamun. Unfortunately, it's complete nonsense. Of the 53 archaeologists involved in the discovery, only 12 died of causes other than old age, with Howard Carter himself living till 65 and Evelyn living till 78. And I guarantee that you've heard that story, and you probably believed it too. But hey, it's a good spooky story, isn't it? After his death in Cairo in 1923, Lord Carnarvon's body was repatriated back to England at his family's request, and he was interred here on Beacon Hill after a private funeral. This is his tomb 100 years later. The Highclere estate provide a simple public information board to inform visitors of the significance of this remote, railed compound. The fencing surrounding the tomb was added a bit later, in the late 1930s. The tomb site is much more impressive when viewed from the air, so let's fly around it by drone and discuss another of the Mummies curse legends that surround this site. The factual reason Lord Carnarvon is buried up here is by his own request. He had expressed the view many years before he died that he wished to be buried on Beacon Hill, so that he was able, in his own words, to have an eternal view of Highclere Castle and the Highclere estate, which, on good days, this location is fantastic for. Unfortunately, after 1923, given the nature of Lord Carnarvon's death and the media sensationalism surrounding the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, another reason was literally invented for his burial in a remote location on Beacon Hill. It was suggested, admittedly by the penny dreadful media of the era, that Carnarvon's body was now cursed, and bringing him back to England would bring back an evil spirit. Therefore, for the protection of the local people, he wasn't buried in a churchyard or Highclere Castle, but up here, well away from habitation, and that the railings were added to cage in the evil spirit. Sadly, though, reality doesn't live up to legend, does it? And there are no dire warnings of monsters up here. When you look at the tomb, it is a simple, railed 10 metres by 10 metres square, with a single gate access, and then there is a flat stone cap over a subterranean brick tomb. The tomb is well maintained by the Highclere estate, but even so, the inscription on the tombstone is now quite weathered after 100 years. So I've transcribed it for you to read at your leisure. And while you're reading that inscription, I'll just make one final point, is that Lord Carnarvon is the only person to be buried up here since the demise of the Iron Age fort 2,500 years earlier. So that concludes our expedition to Lord Carnarvon's tomb, a unique piece of Victorian-style Gothic horror located in the English countryside. I hope you enjoyed the story and the history and the legend, including 7,500 years of human history, all hidden away in the present day. I'll leave it up to you whether you believe the stories, but I'm not going to hang around here after the sun's gone down, and we've got about 15 minutes before it starts to get dark on this remote hill. As ever, if you enjoyed the story, please click like, and if you're into history, whether that's present day, 21st, 20th century or ancient history, consider subscribing to my channel. I would love to have you aboard. As ever, see you in the next video. Bye now.